Most people think the Qing Dynasty fell because it was old, corrupt, or simply unlucky. But history rarely changes for reasons that simple. Sometimes an empire collapses not on the battlefield, but in its ledgers, its debts, and its quiet struggle to hide the truth from itself. So what if the fall of China's last imperial dynasty was not only about rebellion, but about a hidden financial trap draining its strength for decades? And what if that trap began long before anyone realized it existed? Most histories focus on the battles, the emperors, and the dramatic uprisings. But behind every moment of chaos, there is a quieter force shaping events: the movement of money, the rise of debt, and the pressure of a global market China never fully controlled. The Qing Dynasty believed it stood at the center of its world. Yet slowly, almost silently, the ground beneath its economy began to shift, and no one inside the Forbidden City understood how dangerous that shift had become, because the real threat to the dynasty was never a single war or a single treaty. It was a pattern. Small financial compromises repeated again and again, each one weakening the empire a little more. Silver shortages, foreign loans, rising interest payments. They formed invisible cracks spreading across a massive stone wall. From far away, that wall still looked solid and unbreakable, but up close, it was already beginning to crumble. Hi, I'm Mike. Welcome to the channel, where we uncover the hidden forces shaping history, power, and money. Every video here reveals something most people never notice. If you love discovering the truths others overlook, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The Qing Dynasty once ruled over one of the richest civilizations on Earth. For centuries, its economy was stable, silver currency trusted, and its rulers confident. But power can hide cracks, and even the strongest system can weaken slowly. In the Qing world, the danger did not come from armies at first. It came from money. By the late 1700s, China relied almost fully on silver to run its economy. Silver paid the soldiers' powered trade and kept taxes flowing. But silver was not made in China. It came from global markets, which the empire could not control. When the silver supply was stable, the system looked unbreakable, but stability never lasts. A strange pattern began to appear. Silver prices moved in ways no one in Beijing could predict. Foreign traders pushed opium, draining silver out of the country faster than the Qing government could replace it. Suddenly, the empire's money system felt fragile. And when money shakes, everything shakes. Every empire learns this lesson eventually. Your currency is your real army. Officials saw tax revenues shrinking. They saw farmers unable to pay. They saw local governments struggling just to keep basic services running. But instead of repairing the system, the state tried to hide the problem. This silence would cost them dearly. Then came a moment that changed everything. The Opium Wars. Most people think these wars were about drugs, morality, or national honor. But behind the smoke was a financial disaster. Britain needed silver, China needed relief, and the silver flowed out like water. By the 1840s, the Qing treasury was almost empty. There were moments when the empire had less than a single year's budget in reserve. Imagine governing a sixth of the world's population with almost nothing in the bank. It was a quiet alarm, glowing red that few dared to acknowledge. As silver vanished, prices rose. Local officials turned to bribery to survive. Soldiers went unpaid. Rebellions multiplied, and trust in the emperor began to fade. A money crisis had turned into a legitimacy crisis. This is how financial cracks become political earthquakes. Here's a question worth pausing on. How long can an empire stand when its currency loses its soul? Soon the Taiping Rebellion erupted. One of the deadliest conflicts in human history. It did not start only because of ideology or religion. It began because millions were trapped in economic collapse. When families cannot afford rice, loyalty disappears. And when loyalty disappears, so does the mandate to rule. The dynasty survived, but it came out weaker, poorer, and shaken. The wars forced China to rely even more on silver, even more on foreign trade, and even more on outside credit. The empire was still standing, but the world around it had moved forward. Other nations were building banks, railways, and modern armies. China was trying just to keep its accounts balanced. By the late 1800s, Qing leaders realized their entire structure needed modern finance. But reforms require money. And money was exactly what the dynasty lacked. So they turned to foreign banks, and this quietly, slowly became the real turning point. China began taking foreign loans for railways, for armies, and sometimes simply to pay old debts. On paper, these loans looked helpful. In reality, they were a long chain wrapped around the empire's future. The lenders controlled the terms, the repayment schedules, even the revenue sources. China was borrowing money but losing control. This was the hidden financial trap. Not a scam in the criminal sense, but a geopolitical mechanism lending to an empire in decline, then using debt to gain influence. Railway income, tariff income, salt taxes. All were handed to foreign powers as guarantees. The Qing government could no longer collect its own money. The empire was living on a budget written by outsiders. Here's a quiet truth. When you lose control of your income, you lose control of your destiny. By the 1890s, foreign banks were deciding how much China could borrow, what it must pay, and how its financial system should operate. The Qing rulers tried to push back, but to resist, they needed leverage. Leverage comes from wealth, and they had none left. Then came the Boxer Rebellion. The uprising was violent, chaotic, and desperate, but the punishment that followed was even worse. Massive reparations were placed on China, some so large they would take generations to repay. To meet these demands, the Qing borrowed even more money. Debt began feeding more debt. Each new loan was used to pay the previous one. Every future tax was already committed to someone else. The treasury was drowning in numbers it could no longer control. This was no longer governance. It was survival. Foreign oversight expanded every year. Inspectors monitored customs income. Banks controlled major investments. Even basic reforms required approval from lenders. To ordinary people, it looked like the dynasty was losing control, piece by piece, and people notice when an empire stops being its own master. New generation of Chinese thinkers understood what was happening. They saw that the Qing was not falling to armies alone. It was falling to contracts, balance sheets, and foreign credit. Revolution, in their eyes, was the only way to break the cycle. By 1911, the Qing Dynasty collapsed, not because it was ancient, not because it was culturally outdated, but because its financial base had cracked beyond repair. Money had undone what armies could not, and here is the quiet pattern that echoes through time. Empires rarely fall in a single moment. They fall through years of small debts, small losses, and small compromises that slowly turn into chains. The Qing Dynasty learned that too late. But the lesson remains relevant for every nation today. Control your money, or someone else will control you. And that's the story, one more piece of the puzzle, connecting history, money, and power. If this gave you a new way to look at the world, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more than you think. And I'll see you in the next video if you liked this one. I recommend you to watch The Real Reason British Empire Lost Its Power.